I never imagined that life would quietly circle back and place me in front of emotions I believed I had outgrown, emotions I assumed were no longer mine to feel, as if the chapters of my heart had already been written, sealed, and stored away in a place untouched by time. For years I lived with a kind of polished certainty, the calm confidence of a man who had built his world carefully, deliberately, with walls reinforced by experience and a quiet acceptance that some parts of life were simply no longer meant for him. I was comfortable in that belief, comfortable in the stillness that comes from thinking you already understand your limits, from assuming that the universe no longer has surprises reserved for you. My days were structured, my nights predictable, my ambitions focused, and my emotions settled into the smooth, steady rhythm of someone who has learned to keep his heart unbothered. I did not expect disruption, and certainly not the kind that arrives softly, without noise, without warning, without intention, and yet changes everything. I never thought I would feel the pull of something so deep, so quietly consuming, that it would make me reconsider all the conclusions I had drawn about myself, about love, about what I believed was no longer possible for a man who had lived long enough to know better. And yet here I am, recognizing that even the most controlled life can be undone by a single unexpected moment, a single person who walks into your world without trying to impress you, without demanding your attention, and still manages to shift the axis on which your emotions balance. It is a humbling thing to realize that your heart, the same heart you believed had settled into a mature, disciplined calm, is still capable of awakening in ways that feel almost youthful, irrational, beautifully inconvenient. I find myself speaking these words with a strange mixture of disbelief and clarity, the kind of clarity that comes only when something inside you has already changed before you even found the courage to admit it. I fell in love, not in the dramatic, sweeping, cinematic way people often describe, but in a quieter, slower, more profound manner, like a gentle tide that rises without you noticing until you turn around and realize you are already standing ankle-deep in something you can no longer step away from. It did not happen when I was searching, because I was not. It did not happen when I was ready, because I had convinced myself I never would be. It happened when I least expected it, at a time when I had stopped believing in the possibility altogether. And that is perhaps what makes this experience so quietly overwhelming. It arrived like truth, uninvited, undeniable, unmistakably real. There is a certain weight in confessing this, not the heavy weight of regret, but the trembling weight of vulnerability, of exposing a truth even I am still learning to fully understand. My hands feel unsteady when I speak about it, not from nerves, but from the raw emotion that rises when your heart finally admits something your mind has tried to reason away. It is the kind of feeling that makes a man question everything he thought he knew about himself, his limits, his fears, his capacity to allow someone into the protected spaces he once guarded so carefully. And in this quiet confession, there is a kind of rebirth, the rediscovery of parts of myself that I thought time had closed forever. I used to believe that love belonged to the younger version of me, the one who had not yet been hardened by experience or protected by caution. But the truth is, love does not belong to youth. It belongs to whoever is willing to feel deeply, no matter their age, no matter their history. And as I stand in this unfamiliar yet strangely comforting space, I cannot help but wonder how many people have felt this same unexpected revival, this shock of emotion after believing their heart had retired from such things. If you have ever felt something return to you long after you thought it had disappeared, if you have ever been surprised by your own capacity to feel again, then you already understand the quiet miracle I am describing. Love found me when I was no longer searching, and in doing so, it reminded me that some parts of life do not follow our logic, our timelines, or our expectations. They arrive when they are meant to, when they choose to, when something inside us is finally ready even if we do not realize it yet. There is something unusual that happens when you allow yourself to feel again after years of silence inside your own heart. It is like rediscovering a room in your home you forgot existed. A quiet room filled with memories you thought you had outgrown, feelings you thought you had buried, hopes you thought you had replaced with practicality and self-protection. When love returns, it does not knock politely. It steps into your life with the calm certainty of something that knows it belongs there. It does not ask permission. It simply reveals the places within you that were waiting, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, sometimes unknowingly, to be awakened once more. And when I let myself lean into this love, when I stopped resisting, when I stopped telling myself that I was too old, too guarded, too complicated, something within me softened in a way I had not thought possible anymore. The world around me began to feel different, more vivid, more meaningful. Ordinary days felt less ordinary, not because they changed, but because I changed in my way of seeing them. You begin to notice the things you once rushed past. You begin to appreciate small details, the sound of her voice, the way she says your name, the comfort of her presence, the ease of simply existing together. The truth is, love at this stage of life does not arrive like a storm. It arrives like morning light, gentle, steady, patient, illuminating everything slowly until suddenly you realize how much brighter your world has become. But with this brightness also comes the undeniable awareness of risk. Because when you have lived long enough, when you have experienced heartbreak deeply enough, you understand that love is not only an opening, it is an exposure. And exposure can be frightening, especially for those of us who spent years building fortresses around our emotions. Yet I started to see something clearly, that the walls I built were not monuments to strength, they were reminders of fear. They were crafted carefully, brick by brick, from disappointment, from memory, from the desire to avoid ever feeling helpless again. But she made me question whether avoiding pain was worth the price of quiet loneliness. She made me question whether I had mistaken emotional isolation for maturity. She made me realize that safety, despite how comforting it appears, can also be a slow form of self-abandonment. And that hit me deeply, because somewhere along the line, in the name of strength, I had chosen silence instead of expression, distance instead of depth, control instead of connection. But love, true love, does not thrive where walls stand. It thrives only where openness is allowed, where truth is spoken out loud, where two people are brave enough to let each other be seen fully, not the polished version, not the guarded version, but the real human beneath every layer of protection. And when I allowed myself to be that human, when I let her see not just who I wanted her to see, but who I truly was, something extraordinary happened. She stayed. She didn't flinch from my imperfections. She didn't step away when she saw my fears. She didn't hesitate when she recognized the broken places within me. Instead, she approached them with understanding, with gentleness, with the kind of quiet confidence that makes you feel safe in a way you didn't realize you needed. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Love is not found in perfection. It is found in presence. In choosing to stay, in choosing to see, in choosing to care even when it would be easier not to. And she chose me, not because I was flawless, but because I was honest. Not because I was unbreakable, but because I was willing to be vulnerable. Not because I carried no scars, but because I carried them with truth. And something inside me healed in that realization, something that had been waiting for years to finally soften. Love at this stage of life teaches you patience. It teaches you stillness. It teaches you that real connection does not come from intensity alone, but from consistency, from trust, from understanding. You begin to value loyalty more than excitement, sincerity more than drama, stability more than the turbulence of unpredictable emotions. And yet, paradoxically, real love still carries a spark, not the frantic spark of youth, but a deeper, steadier one. A spark that warms rather than burns. A spark that comforts rather than overwhelms. A spark that makes you feel grounded and alive at the same time. And that is the spark she brought into my life. A sense of calm aliveness that I didn't know I was missing. The kind of presence that makes you breathe differently. The kind of connection that makes time feel both slower and more meaningful. But here is the truth most people don't talk about. Loving someone deeply does not erase your fears. It simply gives you a reason stronger than your fears. It gives you something worth being brave for. And bravery, real bravery, is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite fear. It is choosing vulnerability even while trembling. It is opening your heart even when your mind warns you of every possible way it could break. It is standing on the edge of the unknown and saying, I choose this anyway. And choosing her was exactly that. A choice rooted not in certainty, but in faith. Faith in connection. Faith in possibility. Faith in the quiet truth that love is always worth the risk, no matter your age, no matter your past, no matter your fears. And the surprising thing is, the more I leaned into that choice, the easier it became to embrace the parts of myself I had hidden. The parts that were soft, the parts that were unsure, the parts that needed reassurance, the parts that still believed in something gentle. And she made room for all of them, not by fixing me, not by promising perfection, but simply by being there, consistently, calmly, wholeheartedly. And in that constancy, something inside me settled. Something found rest. Something found home. Because that is what mature love feels like. Not a destination, not an escape, but a homecoming. A return to a part of yourself that you thought you had lost. A reminder that your heart, no matter how many years have passed, still knows how to open, still knows how to feel, still knows how to love. The strange thing about falling in love unexpectedly, especially at a stage of life when you believed your heart had already lived its most meaningful chapters, is that it reshapes every assumption you built yourself upon, gently but undeniably, as if a new light had entered the room you thought was already perfectly lit, revealing corners you never explored, revealing parts of yourself you assumed were long gone. And you find yourself observing your own reactions with the calm curiosity of someone who has accumulated enough life experience to recognize that something rare is taking place. Love at this age does not crash into your world like a storm. It arrives with a quiet certainty, a subtle shift in gravity, a deepening of presence, and you realize that you are no longer navigating from scarcity, but from abundance, not from fear, but from clarity, not from desperation, but from a quiet acceptance that your heart still has room. And in that acceptance, there is a profound transformation, the kind of change that happens slowly but feels monumental, the kind of change that reorients your priorities without asking for permission. Suddenly, work feels different, still important, still a part of your identity, but no longer the sole container of your purpose. Suddenly, silence feels different, not empty, but full of anticipation, of thoughts that drift toward her even when you do not intend them to, thoughts that soften the edges of your day. And what fascinates me most is that this shift did not come from longing or seeking. It came from presence, from connection, from the natural ease that formed between us without effort, without agenda, without any attempt to impress or perform. You reach a certain point in life where authenticity becomes the ultimate luxury, where honesty becomes the most attractive quality in another person, where being understood becomes more valuable than being admired. And she understood me in ways I did not expect anyone to understand me ever again. It is humbling, to be seen clearly after years of hiding behind emotional armor that once felt necessary for survival, to be met with understanding instead of judgment, with patience instead of pressure, with curiosity instead of expectation. There is something deeply grounding about being with someone who does not rush you, who does not demand emotional acrobatics, who simply allows you to unfold at your own pace. And as I found myself unfolding, slowly, cautiously, unintentionally, I realized that the version of me emerging in these moments was someone I had not met before, someone softer, someone braver, someone more willing to take emotional risks not because love guaranteed safety, but because the connection made the risk worth considering. And that is the moment you begin to recognize that love at this stage of life is not about losing yourself. It is about becoming more of yourself. It is about expanding into emotional spaces you once believed were closed permanently, about rediscovering capacities you assumed had aged out of you, about embracing a kind of emotional maturity that does not come from innocence, but from experience, not from naive hope, but from earned wisdom, not from fantasy, but from reality. The more we spoke, the more I found myself noticing the smallest details. The way she took pauses between thoughts as if she was making room for truth to arrive fully formed. The way she looked at the world with a balance of realism and optimism. The way she listened not to respond but to understand. The way she carried her own scars with dignity rather than bitterness. Her presence made my world feel more honest. And honesty is a rare currency, one that becomes more valuable the older you get. I remember sitting alone one evening after one of our conversations, not doing anything dramatic, just sitting there, letting the weight and warmth of everything I felt settle in me like a tide rising slowly but purposefully. And in that stillness, I realized that my heart was awakening in ways I thought it had forgotten how to. Not the reckless awakening of youth, not the impulsive rush that comes from inexperience, but a deeper, steadier awakening born from understanding what love requires, what it offers, and what it demands of you. It demands courage. It demands honesty. It demands the willingness to be seen without the filters you once mastered. And I found myself willing in a way that surprised me, willing in a way that felt almost like an instinct I had buried but not lost. But along with that willingness came fear, not the childish fear of rejection, but the mature fear of vulnerability, the fear of opening a door you once swore you would never open again, the fear of letting someone matter enough to hurt you. Because love, no matter how mature, no matter how grounded, carries risk. It always has. It always will. And yet, the risk felt different this time. It felt manageable. It felt meaningful. It felt like a risk that had the potential to redefine my life rather than disrupt it. The more I thought about her, the more I realized that the greatest danger was not in loving her, but in denying the chance to experience something real, something honest, something that aligned with the man I had become rather than the man I used to be. And that realization changed everything. It shifted the internal argument I had with myself from should I love again to why would I deny myself the possibility of something this genuine? Because that is what love becomes when it arrives unexpectedly in maturity. Not chaos, but clarity. Not intensity, but depth. Not volatility, but stability. It becomes a quiet certainty that grows slowly, gently, firmly. And with every passing day, the certainty grew. It grew in the calm moments, in the conversations that lingered long after they ended, in the silences that felt natural rather than awkward, in the way my life began to feel less like a solitary pursuit and more like a shared horizon waiting to be explored. And as I allowed myself to lean into that feeling, to acknowledge it instead of resisting it, I realized something that became one of the most important truths I have learned in my adult life. Love does not arrive when you are ready. It arrives when you are capable. And capability is not about timing. It is about healing. It is about growth. It is about emotional readiness woven through the fabric of your past experiences, your failures, your heartbreaks, your lessons. And for the first time in a long time, I felt capable. Not perfect, not unscarred, not entirely fearless, but capable of giving, capable of receiving, capable of building something real without the need to hide behind old wounds. And that capability, that quiet self-awareness, made the love between us feel not like an intrusion, but like an alignment, not like a risk, but like an evolution, not like an accident, but like a long overdue truth resurfacing at exactly the right moment, even if I did not recognize it immediately. And so the story continued, not with fireworks, not with drama, but with steady presence, with growing trust, with a sense of emotional partnership that made me understand how wrong I had been to assume that meaningful love only belongs to the young. Because the truth is this: love belongs to the brave, regardless of age. There comes a moment in every person's life when they quietly realize that the version of themselves they once protected so fiercely is no longer the version they wish to carry into the future. It happens slowly, like the turning of a season, subtle enough that you almost miss it, yet powerful enough that once you notice it, you cannot deny its influence. That is what began happening to me long before I had the courage to acknowledge it. Love, unexpected, uninvited, unplanned, did not enter my life like a storm crashing down my walls. It entered like sunlight creeping through the edges of closed curtains, soft at first, almost invisible, yet persistent enough to warm everything it touched. And as much as I tried to pretend I didn't feel it, as much as I tried to rationalize the shifts inside me, the truth was that something profound had begun to unfold, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I started noticing a gentleness in my own thoughts, a softening in places I believed had hardened permanently. I began observing myself from a distance, almost like watching a stranger rediscover pieces of their humanity they had long abandoned. It's strange, isn't it? How connection works. How another person's presence, without effort, without intention, can awaken dormant parts of you, can remind you that you are still capable of softness, of curiosity, of wonder, of warmth. And it wasn't the dramatic kind of awakening you see in stories. No, it was quieter than that, more grounded, more real. It was in the way I found myself listening, truly listening, when she spoke. In the way I caught myself remembering small details she had mentioned casually. In the way I started to look forward to moments that had no promise of anything more than simple conversation. I realized that I had gone so long without being emotionally seen that I had convinced myself I didn't need it. I had made peace with loneliness by calling it independence. I had mistaken emotional numbness for strength, believing that the only way to avoid pain was to avoid feeling altogether. But she made me feel again, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through presence, through consistency, through a kind of authenticity that is rare in a world full of noise and pretenses. And it humbled me. It softened me. It made me rethink parts of myself I had dismissed as unchangeable. The truth is, falling in love at this stage of life is nothing like falling in love when you are young. Youth loves loudly, impulsively, without calculation, without caution. But love that comes later, after heartbreak, after disappointment, after self-reinvention, is quieter, deeper, more discerning. It asks different questions. It requires different courage. It demands a different kind of honesty. It forces you to confront not only how you feel, but why you feel, and whether you are willing to risk the stability you built to protect yourself. And I resisted that risk with everything in me. I told myself I was imagining the connection. I told myself we were only close because we understood each other intellectually. I told myself the warmth I felt was simply admiration, nothing more. I lied to myself because acknowledging the truth would mean confronting a fear I thought I had buried long ago, the fear of losing myself again, of caring too deeply, of hoping again. Because hope, once broken, becomes a fragile thing. You begin to treat it like glass, rare, dangerous, easily shattered. But hope does not die quietly. It lingers beneath the surface, waiting for something or someone to draw it out. And she did, not intentionally, not knowingly, simply by being who she was, steady, open, honest in a way that felt both refreshing and disarming. The more I tried to suppress what I felt, the stronger those feelings became. The more I attempted to create emotional distance, the more I realized I didn't want distance. Not from her. Not anymore. Because being around her didn't feel like a threat. It felt like home. And that terrified me more than anything else. Home is dangerous when you've been wandering for too long. Comfort is unsettling when you've grown accustomed to emotional coldness. Softness feels like exposure when you've trained your heart to be steel. And yet, despite all my resistance, something in me kept leaning toward her, selfishly, quietly, uncontrollably. One evening, I remember sitting alone, reflecting in that slow, deliberate way that only late-night solitude can bring. I asked myself a question I hadn't dared to ask in years. When did I stop believing that I deserved something soft? And the silence that followed told me everything. Somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself that love was something I had to earn through perfection or sacrifice, something I had to win through effort, something too fragile for someone like me. But love, real love, does not demand perfection. It demands presence. It demands vulnerability. It demands truth. It asks you to show up as you are, not as the polished version of yourself the world applauds. And the more I realized this, the more undeniable my feelings became. I was falling in love, slowly, steadily, inevitably. Not because I chose to, not because I planned to, but because my heart, despite everything I had done to silence it, recognized something genuine, something rare, something worth risking the quiet equilibrium I had built around myself. And the most surprising part? It wasn't the intensity of the emotion that scared me. I've felt intense love before. I know what it is to be consumed by feeling. No, what scared me was the calmness of it, the steadiness, the quiet certainty that whispered, "This matters." Because when love arrives calmly, without chaos, without confusion, without forcing itself into your life, that is when it is real. That is when it has the power to change you. And I could feel myself changing, subtly, quietly, profoundly. My thoughts became gentler. My patience grew. My ambitions reshaped themselves to include the idea of companionship rather than isolation. My future no longer felt like a long, silent corridor I had to walk alone. There was a quiet warmth at the end of it now, a softness I had not expected but deeply welcomed. Because as much as I feared vulnerability, I feared regret more. I feared the idea of looking back years from now knowing I had let something real slip away because I was too afraid to feel again. And so, part by part, without intention, without plan, I allowed myself to lean into the possibility of love. Not foolishly, not blindly, but bravely. Bravery in adulthood does not look like grand gestures or reckless declarations. Bravery looks like showing up with an open heart when you know exactly how heartbreak feels. Bravery looks like risking emotional exposure when you have every reason to stay guarded. Bravery looks like choosing connection over comfort, growth over safety, truth over isolation. And that is what she brought into my life, a reason to be brave again, a reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, my heart had not finished its story yet. The strange thing about opening your heart after years of silence is that it does not happen in a single dramatic moment. It happens slowly, subtly, like light returning to a room you forgot had windows. And as that light returns, you begin to see yourself differently, not through the distorted filter of past pain, but through the honest mirror that new love provides. There is a calmness that comes with this realization, the kind of calmness only a person who has lived through storms can truly understand. It is not excitement. It is not infatuation. It is a deep exhale after years of holding your breath. A recognition that perhaps the world is not as harsh as you once believed, that maybe the heart is more resilient than you ever gave it credit for. I began to notice how her presence changed the rhythm of my days, not by disrupting them, but by gently integrating into them. The way a new melody aligns effortlessly with an old one, not overpowering the original, but enhancing it. There was no chaos, no confusion, no drama, just quiet alignment, something I never knew I needed until it was already happening. And with each passing day, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the nature of love, on what it truly means to feel something real, something steady, something that does not burn fast and disappear, but warms you slowly from the inside out like a fireplace in a cold room, comforting, reliable, and deeply grounding. I realized that the kind of love I had feared was not the kind of love I had found. This love did not demand. It did not overwhelm. It did not break down the door of my life. It simply knocked until I was brave enough to open it. And when I opened it, it entered gently, respectfully, like someone who understands the value of a home they did not build and treats every corner of it with care. I started to understand that maybe maturity does not diminish our capacity to love. Maybe it expands it, refines it, shapes it into something deeper, something less impulsive but far more meaningful. When you are young, you love with the energy of a wildfire, intense, bright, uncontrollable. But as you age, if you are lucky, you learn to love like a sunrise, slow, consistent, beautiful in a way that only becomes clearer with time. The more I spoke to her, the more I saw pieces of myself reflected in her, not because we were the same, but because she understood even the parts of me I did not say out loud. Her presence made me question the narratives I had built around myself, the beliefs that had quietly governed my life. I had always believed I was too complicated, too guarded, too hardened by experience to be loved in any deep way again. But here she was, challenging every assumption, not with arguments, but with understanding, with patience, with the kind of effortless empathy that cannot be taught. And it made me wonder how many of the limitations we accept are self-created illusions born from old wounds. In her presence, my scars felt less like signs of damage and more like evidence of survival. Proof that I had endured enough to recognize something real when it finally appeared. The more I let her into my world, the more I discovered how much space I had unknowingly kept locked away, reserved for someone I believed would never come. It is a humbling realization to know you preserved corners of your heart without meaning to, corners untouched by time, waiting for the right person without ever admitting it to yourself. And as I began to explore those spaces again, I found that love in this stage of life carries a different kind of power. It is not the frantic desire to hold on, but the calm willingness to share. It is not the fear of losing someone, but the gratitude of having found them. It is not the reckless hope of youth, but the steady confidence of experience. That is what she brought into my life. Not chaos, but clarity. Not confusion, but grounding. Not temporary passion, but lasting presence. And the more I let myself feel, the more I realized how deeply this had begun to change me. I became more patient, more thoughtful, more aware of the way I moved through the world. Love softens you in ways you do not expect. It does not erase the strength you have built. It simply teaches that strength does not need to be hard. That vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. It is an extension of it. And as I allowed myself to feel more, I found a serenity I had not known in years. A sense of balance, a sense of being anchored. I started to notice how conversations with her lingered in my mind long after they ended, how her words echoed in the quiet hours of the night, not because they were dramatic, but because they were sincere, honest, and human in a world that often feels anything but. She had a way of turning ordinary moments into something meaningful simply by being fully present. And presence is something rare, something precious, something that cannot be faked. It is a gift, and she offered it naturally. This is when I realized that love at this stage of life is not about losing control. It is about gaining clarity. It is not about being swept off your feet. It is about finally finding solid ground. It is not about chasing a feeling. It is about recognizing a connection. And the more I recognized it, the more I understood that this connection was not here to take anything from me. It was here to give, to expand, to elevate, to deepen the parts of me that had been dormant for far too long. I started to walk differently through my day. I carried myself with more intention, more calmness, more awareness of how fortunate I was to feel something so rare at this point in life. And for the first time in many years, I felt a sense of anticipation about the future, not fear, not hesitation, but a genuine curiosity about what this journey could become. Because when someone enters your life with gentleness instead of pressure, with understanding instead of expectation, with presence instead of demands, you begin to see the world differently. You begin to see yourself differently. You begin to see love not as a risk, but as an opportunity to grow, to heal, to rediscover parts of yourself you thought were gone forever. And that is where I found myself, standing at the intersection of who I had been and who I was becoming, guided by a love I never expected but could no longer imagine living without. There is a moment in life, a quiet moment, when you realize that everything you thought was permanent, everything you believed was final, everything you once accepted as the blueprint of your fate, can change with the arrival of one person, and that realization settles into you not with shock, but with a slow, almost reverent understanding that your life is larger than the limits you once imposed on it. And this is what I began to feel as the days unfolded, not the loud, rushing intensity of young love, but something steadier, something profound, something that felt like it was rearranging the very architecture of my inner world without force, without chaos, without demand. I found myself thinking differently about my future, not because she insisted on it, not because anything about my life required restructuring, but because her presence made me question the ways I had grown comfortable with emptiness, with solitude, with the mechanical rhythm of a life lived safely, a life where nothing could break because nothing new was allowed to enter. She did not try to change me, did not suggest transformation, did not ask for any kind of adjustment, but simply existing beside her made me understand how much of myself I had muted over the years, how much passion I had labeled as unnecessary, how much hope I had called unrealistic, how much softness I had replaced with practicality because I believed that maturity meant emotional quietness rather than emotional depth. And the more time I spent with her, the more I realized that the life I had constructed was not wrong, but incomplete, not empty, but lacking the color that only connection can bring. And suddenly the routines that once felt stable began to feel small, not in a painful way, but in a way that reminded me that comfort can also be confinement if you stay in it for too long. I began to feel myself expanding again, not outwardly, not in the extravagant way youth expands, but inwardly, in the deeper, richer way that maturity expands. When you learn to value presence more than performance, truth more than charm, simplicity more than spectacle. I noticed how my thoughts softened when they drifted toward her, how the harsh edges I carried for years began to smooth themselves, how the distrust I once treated as wisdom began to seem like fear wearing a sophisticated mask. And I could not deny that something inside me was shifting, evolving, awakening in a way I had long believed impossible. And what surprised me most was not that I felt this way, but that it felt natural, felt earned, felt like a continuation of everything life had been quietly preparing me for through every heartbreak, every setback, every lonely night that taught me resilience without teaching me how to reopen. She did not storm into my life. She entered gently, like a truth I had been avoiding, like a softness I had forgotten I deserved, and suddenly I understood that real love at this age is not about intensity, but about clarity. The clarity of seeing someone without illusion, without fantasy, without projection, and still choosing them not because they complete something in you, but because they enhance what already exists. And as I grew closer to her, I found myself reflecting on the person I had become when I stopped believing in love, how I had built routines that kept me efficient but not fulfilled, how I had mastered being alone but had forgotten the beauty of being understood, how I had convinced myself that emotional independence meant emotional isolation, and that commitment was a risk I no longer needed to take. But now, sitting beside her, listening to the quiet steadiness of her voice, watching the way she moved through the world with a kind of unforced grace, I realized that the fear I once called wisdom was nothing more than armor. Heavy, unnecessary, outdated armor that I no longer wanted to carry. And it wasn't her job to make me brave. She simply reminded me that bravery was still inside me, waiting for someone worthy enough to inspire it. There were nights when I would lie awake, not anxious, not restless, but deeply aware that my life had shifted into a new chapter, one I hadn't planned for, one I didn't think I deserved, one that felt both fragile and powerful at the same time. I wondered how someone could bring so much calm into my life, while simultaneously stirring emotions that had been sleeping for years. I wondered how I went from convincing myself that love was a closed door to suddenly realizing it had been waiting quietly for me to return. And most of all, I wondered how I could feel both vulnerable and secure with her, how I could feel exposed yet safe, how I could feel terrified yet at peace, all at once. It was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was subtle in the way that real love always is when it grows from honesty rather than urgency. It was the gentle familiarity of a shared silence, the comfort of being understood without explanation, the quiet joy of knowing that someone sees you exactly as you are and chooses you without hesitation. And in all of this, I found myself changing not because I wanted to impress her, not because I feared losing her, but because she helped me remember a version of myself I had abandoned, the version that believed in connection, in partnership, in emotional courage, the version that understood that letting someone in is not a weakness but a triumph, not a danger, but a kind of freedom I had forgotten existed. And as these realizations settled into me, I understood something deeply, something I had missed for years. Love does not return to the heart until the heart is ready to handle it with maturity, with grace, with the kind of steady strength that only life experience can build. And maybe that is why love feels different now, deeper now, more sacred now, because I am no longer falling blindly into it. I am walking into it with awareness, with intention, with the understanding that love at this stage of life is not about escape, but about alignment. Not about filling empty spaces, but about sharing fullness. Not about avoiding loneliness, but about choosing companionship for reasons that are sincere rather than desperate. And in this truth, I found myself not just falling in love with her, but also rediscovering a softer, wiser version of myself. One capable of giving and receiving love without fear dictating the terms. One willing to risk the unknown because the present moment already feels like a gift worth protecting, worth nurturing, worth believing in again. There comes a point in every journey, especially the kind that unfolds quietly within the unseen interior of the heart, where you pause, not because you want to stop, but because you finally realize how far you have come without noticing the distance. I remember sitting alone one evening, long after the world had gone to sleep, with only the soft hum of the night filling the silence, and realizing that the man I had become was not the same man who once shut himself away from life, from connection, from anything that resembled emotional risk. It was strange, almost unrecognizable, to feel this version of myself settling into something deeper, something gentler, something more aligned with the truth I had been avoiding for years. Falling in love again did not just open a door, it revealed a part of myself I had locked away without fully understanding the cost. And as the days unfolded, I began to see how love, mature love, carries a quiet intelligence of its own, a soft but steady wisdom that does not rush, does not demand, does not drown you in intensity the way youthful love does, but instead wraps itself around you like a calm presence, steadying you, grounding you, teaching you that strength and vulnerability are not opposites, but partners in a kind of emotional balance that many people spend their entire lives searching for. In her presence, I found that balance without even realizing it. It happened slowly at first, like the shifting of seasons, like the way dawn arrives long before the sun becomes visible. She brought a softness into my life that I did not know I was missing, the kind of softness that makes you breathe differently, think differently, live differently. And I noticed that I was no longer preparing for disappointment the way I used to, no longer rehearsing for pain, even in moments of joy. That was new for me. For years, I had carried the weight of old heartbreak like a quiet companion, a constant reminder that everything good could shatter at any moment. But with her, that weight began to lift in small, almost imperceptible pieces, until one day I realized I was no longer living in anticipation of loss. Instead, I was living in appreciation of what I had. This connection, this peace, this unexpected return to emotional aliveness. And I found myself wanting to build a life that honored this feeling, not just for her, but for myself. I found myself wanting to evolve, to grow, to be the kind of man who deserved the depth of love she gave so effortlessly. That desire was transformative. It made me pay attention to the parts of myself I had ignored, the patterns, the fears, the old habits of withdrawing whenever something felt too real. I began confronting the emotional reflexes that once protected me, but now only limited me. I learned to speak openly even when it felt uncomfortable, to express softness even when my instinct was to stay guarded, to admit fears without letting them control me. And the more honest I became with her, the more honest I became with myself. That is something people rarely talk about. The way love, real love, holds up a mirror not to the polished version of who you pretend to be, but to the deeper, rawer truth of who you actually are. And instead of judgment, instead of rejection, instead of the fear you expect, sometimes what you receive in return is acceptance. She offered me that acceptance in a way no one else ever had. She listened to the weight behind my words, not just the words themselves. She understood the things I struggled to articulate, the emotions I could not name, the fears I thought were too complicated to explain. Her presence made honesty feel not only safe, but natural. And slowly, that safety created a new version of me, one that no longer needed to hide behind emotional distance. But love, true love, does not only reveal your softness, it also reveals your strength. I discovered strength in vulnerability, strength in choosing connection instead of isolation, strength in trusting someone with the parts of myself I once protected like fragile glass. That shift changed the way I moved through the world. I stopped seeing vulnerability as a risk and started seeing it as a bridge, a connection point, a doorway to something richer than solitude. And as that understanding deepened, so did my appreciation for her, for the ease she brought into my life, for the way she loved without asking me to be anything other than who I was. It was in the small things that her love became most visible. The way she paid attention to the details I thought no one noticed, the way she remembered the parts of my story I mentioned only once, the way she held space for my silence without trying to fill it. She never demanded that I be perfect. She simply encouraged me to be present. And in return, I found myself wanting to give more, to show up more, to create a life where she felt as understood and valued as she made me feel. Loving her did not feel like something I had to chase or fight for. It felt like something I grew into naturally, like the quiet unfolding of something inevitable. And in that unfolding, I discovered a deeper truth, that love, especially later in life, is not about recreating the intensity of youth, but about building something that can stand the test of reality. Something with foundation, with patience, with depth. Something that does not collapse the moment life becomes difficult. Something that does not rely on constant excitement to feel alive. Something that feels like partnership, like companionship, like coming home after being away for far too long. And I realized that the greatest gift of this love was not the excitement it brought, but the peace it offered. Peace in knowing that I no longer had to face life alone. Peace in knowing that someone saw me, fully, completely, and chose to stay. Peace in realizing that my heart, after everything it had been through, still had the capacity to love deeply, to love fearlessly, to love without holding back. That realization was healing in ways I cannot fully explain. It was like exhaling for the first time after years of holding my breath. It was like stepping into sunlight after living in the shade. It was like rediscovering a part of myself I thought I had lost. And as I continue to navigate this love, I understand something now that I did not understand before. That life does not give you what you expect. It gives you what you are finally ready to receive. And I was finally ready. Ready for love. Ready for connection. Ready for a new chapter. Ready for her. Sometimes life gives us a second chance without warning. And when it does, don't run from it. Let it in. Because the love you think you lost may be the love that finds you again. Thank you for watching. Take care of your heart, and let it stay open to what's meant for you.